It's Gigi No Re. I'll tell you what, our schedules have been really weird recently, so that's why this episode is just going to be yours truly, Daniel, talking to you alone in a room without the company of others, without the other Gigi No Re players. It's sad, but this is the state to which we've been reduced this month. However, I do have something good for you this week, and that is something that you can drop into your campaign should you desire, although there is a lot of specific lore that is relevant to my City of the Crepuscular Queen, or CCQ, campaign. There are episodes in the backlog that show what we've done in the campaign up to the moment where this module is being slotted in. So you can go listen to those if you are curious. And that should also make me bring this point up. Players who play in my game, please do not listen to this episode or read the blog post because there are spoilers in the accompanying materials that I'm publishing. With that out of the way, I wanted to show some of my prep for my home campaign because it expresses and it's helping me to cement in my own head certain procedures that I think will make preparation more fun and also easier, and then also make the finished product more enjoyable, significant, meaningful, I suppose, to the players. And one simple way that you can do this is to think of town and dungeon as a dyad, as a group that necessarily goes together, relates to one another, reveals one another. The town is incredibly important in D&D, yet it is often neglected, I think. Without the town and what it represents, settlement, human civilization, without that, you have like an MMO. You go to a dungeon, you level up, you go to a dungeon. There's no drama there. I mean, there can be, but let's just say the dramatic potential is significantly reduced compared to the situation that you have when you introduce a town. Even if you don't prepare anything special in the town, just the fact that there are people there and you can improvise relations between them as the PCs encounter perhaps the same NPCs over and over again. This in itself generates or can generate drama, and that's good. And it's even more effective, I believe. I think it will make your players feel more immersed, feel more engaged, and committed to the fiction that you're creating together if towns and dungeons are related. This is one small way that you can create a coherent lore for your setting if you're doing a homebrew setting, or even if you were adapting an existing setting like Faerun or whatever. You can still be creative in your little area of Faerun, and when the human mind discovers a connection between two things, and discovers it, is not told it explicitly, this is immensely satisfying. This is the puzzle-solving endorphin rush, and you can generate this simply by changing the way you prep things a little bit. Let's talk about it. You're going to prep dungeons, you're going to prep towns. Make them related to one another. So in this example I have here, and again, players, please do not listen to this. It's just me talking, you hear me talk all the time. You don't even want to listen to this, just turn it off, thanks. And the town they're in now, it's a town called Saxtisa. I have some idea of what's going on in the town already. However, I started this process of generating a town simply by imagining a couple of distinctive motifs, images or customs, or maybe even landmarks that would be repeated and reinforced to generate an identity, a specific identity for the town. Now, this is in particular a town, a market town. It's not a random hamlet out in the middle of nowhere, and there's thousands of them. In this kingdom, there are not that many towns. There's less than 12, I believe. So you can afford to give it a little bit of character. A boring hamlet that you go through and that doesn't even have a city wall, you don't really need to make that very specific. It's going to be like all the other hamlets, probably. But for a town, you can afford to give it a personality. So I was just improvising in my notes, probably maybe over lunch one day at work, and I thought, let's give it pale hounds and eels. And let's say there's stray dogs everywhere, but it's cool. The dogs are fine and taken care of in general by people. So that led me to think, how did this uniqueness of the town originate? And that's what you want to do. You want to come up with a striking image that you can repeat as a motif in the town, and then come up with an origin story for that, and tie that into your dungeon, and also to the items sold in town, and also to the main inn in town. So if you look at the blog post, which should be linked to in the show notes, so just click that, you'll go to the blog post. There is a PDF that I've attached that shows you the town, which is a map that's abstract and annotated, so it's everything you need to run it just on one page. And then you've got a wilderness area and then a key to the wilderness area that has more information. If you want to get the dungeon that goes along with it, you'll have to become a patron. Patreon.com/GGNORE. And $1 a month, and you can cancel after that if you want. I don't care. Don't do that. I'm not telling you to do that, but if you do it, I'm not going to send the police after you. But you'll get the access to that last page, that one-page dungeon that ties everything back together and explains how this town came to be and the imagery that you'll see in the town. Regardless, you generate a map, and as you're listening to this, if you can, I would take a look at the blog post at the same time so you can see what I'm talking about. I know I needed a few important elements for a town in general. You need a church, you need a couple things specific to your setting, like there's an entwined throne, which if you don't play CCQ, my campaign, that won't make any sense to you, but that doesn't matter. You have things like that in your own campaign probably. You have an inn, a market, a smith, and some other things, but those are the main important things. And so for each of these things, I dressed it up with the motifs that I have already described. So the entrances to the towns at the gates have these large mastiffs that are pale and carved in marble. So we got the pale hounds motif going on. And then in the marketplace, I thought it might be fun if they had some pale eels and aquariums. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I just repeat that sort of motif in the inn and roundabout town. And then in the marketplace, I think it's a good idea, and this is easy to improvise on the spot if you have to. For each marketplace, of course, assume that they have the general adventuring stuff, maybe with some weird stuff as an exception, but then give them special items that are probably a bit pricier, that are unique to this town, that aren't found anywhere else in your campaign, and that tie into the motifs that you've already established. So for instance, you can get a mastiff helmet and really swag out. Everybody's going to know that if other new people come into your campaign and they find out that your character has this really cool looking mastiff helmet, well, they have to go to this town and get the blacksmith to make it for them. They can't easily find it. But if your characters want, they can all cosplay together as hound knights or whatever. So it's just fun. Just think, I have 8 special things here, even including the rations. The rations you get here in this town are different than the rations you get in other towns. It's just fun. Gives it a personality. It's a good idea. But so all this is there, and then I had to come up with a backstory for how this town became associated with the elements that I've selected, which is eels that are pale, and then pale hounds as well. And I don't want to bore you with going moment by moment and how I generated a backstory for this. But if you look at the materials that I've put on the website, put on our blog post, you will see how those things related. You see there was a backstory involving a princess who went to look for a lost dog in the woods and died. And there's a number of other things going on here, but it doesn't have to be that complex. But as you go, you're writing one thing, you just add additional details, one more detail, and then you've got something that's rather interesting and something that furthermore can give the players the sense of discovery when they figure out what's going on. They're seeing these in each location. You put a clue or something relevant to the backstory. And then once the players have gathered enough of these, they can put together a picture of what happened. And it's not like a puzzle where they have to solve it or else they can't progress. It's nothing like that. But it might help them solve other puzzles, optional puzzles to get treasure or to defeat monsters or find the weakness of a monster. But the primary reason beyond all that is just to make it satisfying, both to write and to play. And if you'll check the second page, which is the wilderness map, you'll see I've got a procedure for generating monster layers on the fly, because I needed that, so I just wrote it down on there. I'll probably create a Chartopia, which if you haven't checked out Chartopia, please do so. It's the best random table generator and roller in existence. But I'll probably create a version of the lair generator for that, which will be more complicated. But this, you roll a bunch of dice and it gives you something quickly, so you can generate interesting layers. The problem with layers, right, is that they're boring. They're just empty spaces with monsters in them. So this tries to get you to think of interesting locations to encounter things in. That's the point of it. Now, you also will have stats, yada yada, some treasure. And then if you go to the key on the next page, which is the last page of the non-patron version of this document, you will see some more information that exemplifies how I am deciding what's important to note in a key. I want to have everything at my fingertips to run a location on one spread, a left and right facing page that's 8.5 by 11. To accomplish this, I'm writing in a notebook that's basically 6 by 9 format and hole punched so that I can easily print out write-ups that I've done electronically and print them 2 to a page and cut them in half and then hole punch them so I can incorporate them easily into my notes. I can also write in it easily because it's accessible and convenient form factor. I hate having an 8.5 by 11 form factor of anything behind my DM screen. I think it's too big, but the 6 by 9 form factor, that's where it's at. So everything that you're seeing in this PDF that I put up on the blog post is meant for that form factor. When you print it out, if you print the pages 2 to a page, you'll have it exactly as I'm running it. And you can see in this key that we're doing a few things. We are putting a tilde or a little squiggly line beside areas that have things that detect as magic. We are highlighting important detail. We're providing detail with the surface layer first, so that when you are reading this or scanning it at the table, you're not going to accidentally drop a spoiler to your players, hopefully. You will just describe what things initially look like, and then if they continue to investigate, you will have had time to read further down in the description to see what's really going on in the location. You'll see magic items that don't grant static bonuses. They grant fun abilities that have limited use, which is something that a lot of people are doing these days, but it's good practice. And every time that I'm generating content for a location, which it's not a huge area here. This is a few locations, and then the dungeon is actually pretty small too. It's maybe 12 keyed locations, something like that. But I'm concentrating more on quality rather than quantity. We're focusing and tying everything into our themes, our motifs, and our backstory, so that when the dungeon is finished, you will come out knowing more about the world and perhaps changed by it. For instance, if you're familiar with the Dark Souls games and Bloodborne and Demon Souls, yada yada, there are these things called covenants, which are, it's kind of like an alignment, but you swear an oath to an organization or a person, and then you do things that are relevant to that person or organization's interests, and then get rewarded for it. Well, I like that, and so I have something in here called the Hound Knights that is basically like a Dark Souls covenant. And as you can tell, it ties into the motif that we established earlier with the Pale Hounds. And so when our players finish this content, I mean, they don't have to finish it, it's a sandbox game, but should they go all the way through and explore it 100%, then they are going to be different, the world is going to be different, but in a coherent way that conceptually makes sense. I didn't just generate stuff out of the DMG on random tables and try really hard to fit it together, even though it doesn't really go together. And what's nice about this also is that if you focus in this way, it's easier to generate things. If you can't think of anything more, then it's just done. You're done with the concept, or you can come back to it later. But you focus, generate something that's memorable and perhaps in some degree meaningful. And at the end, I think you'll be happy, and then your players will be happy. So, as I said before, please do check out the blog post so that you can see what I'm talking about and download this, perhaps use it or adapt it to your own campaign, and let us know how it works out for you. Again, to see the dungeon that goes along with it, that's 4 pages total, 3 if you're not subscribed to our Patreon. But go to patreon.com/ggnoRe if you want to check out all we have to offer, which includes special episodes and other materials that you can drag and drop into your campaigns. Even a superhero game that we're about to play that I made up. You can read that. Also, just check out our show notes anyway, because it'll have most of this on there. Even if you don't get the dungeon, you should be able to figure out how the dungeon would be generated. That makes sense. And with that, I will bid you good day and GG no Re.